Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling a subject that's been on my mind a lot lately, and it's the overrepresentation of autistic individuals in the criminal justice system. I mean, the research is pretty startling, indicating that something like 30% of autistic adults have faced arrest or incarceration at some point. That's a seriously significant number, way higher than a lot of other marginalized groups.
Okay.
And it really kind of makes you stop and think, what's really going on here?
Yeah, you're right to be concerned about that. It is really striking statistic. And the thing is, it's not that autistic people are somehow more likely to commit crimes or anything. It's really more often a case of the system itself not understanding or accommodating their needs.
I see. Yeah, and reading through some of the sources for this deep dive, the lack of awareness among police officers and legal professionals just keeps coming up again and again. I mean, can you imagine trying to navigate a police interrogation or a courtroom setting when you're dealing with sensory overload, social anxieties, and maybe even communication differences?
Oh, absolutely. It's a recipe for misunderstanding. Those kind of natural autistic behaviors can easily be mistaken for something suspicious or defiant,
Yeah.
by someone who's not trained to recognize them.
So like someone who avoids eye contact might be seen as hiding something.
Exactly. Or even something like stimming,
Yeah.
which is just a common self-regulating behavior for autistic individuals. Well, that could be misconstrued as aggression.
Right. It's like two completely different operating systems trying to
It
communicate.
really is. Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking to think about the potential for misunderstandings there and how quickly a situation could escalate.
Hmm.
The sources I've been looking at also highlight the whole sensory issue and the potential for trauma. I mean, police stations and jails are already pretty intense environments for anyone.
Yeah.
But can you imagine experiencing them with heightened sensory sensitivities?
Mm.
The bright lights, the noise, the crowds. It's kind of overwhelming just thinking about it.
And that's exactly it. For someone with autism, those intense sensory experiences can be just completely debilitating. But it can lead to anxiety meltdowns, even make it hard for them to understand and respond to instructions properly.
It seems like with that kind of miscommunication, especially under the pressure of a legal situation, that the consequences could be pretty serious.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And it's not even just about that initial encounter either. You have to think about the long-term impacts, the fear, the stigma, the just immense difficulty of reintegrating back into society. It's a tough cycle to break out of.
It really is. And we haven't even touched on the social and communication challenges that many autistic individuals face. I mean, just navigating a normal social situation can be tough enough. But imagine the pressure of legal proceedings where the stakes are so incredibly high.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the expectations in those settings. You're expected to read subtle cues, understand sarcasm, articulate your thoughts clearly under pressure. Those are things that a lot of autistic individuals really struggle with. And then you layer on top of that the sensory overload and the potential for miscommunication that we've already talked about. It's a perfect storm for things to go wrong.
It almost seems like setting someone up to fail.
Yeah, in a way.
Like take a police interrogation, for example.
Yeah.
With the rapid fire questions, the stern voice, the expectation of like sustained eye contact. I mean, that would be difficult for anyone. But for someone on the spectrum, it can be terrifying.
Yeah, you have to remember that autistic individuals process information differently. They might need more time to respond. They might need things explained very literally. They might have trouble picking up on those subtle nuances of social interaction. And if the authorities interacting with them aren't aware of those differences, well, the potential for misjudgments and escalation is huge.
And what I'm gathering from a lot of these sources is that it's not even just about autism itself, but also about the fact that mental health conditions often co-occur. There's a higher prevalence of anxiety, depression, even PTSD among autistic people. And that has to complicate interactions with the justice system even further, doesn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. It really makes you wonder, are we as a society criminalizing mental health differences instead of providing adequate support and understanding? It's a tough question to grapple with, but an essential one.
It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does make you question things. And that connection between autism and mental health, it goes deeper than just, individual diagnoses. It speaks to how society as a whole has perceived and responded to neurodiversity.
I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear more about that. What are you seeing in the research?
Well, for a long time, autism just wasn't understood. It was often viewed as a behavioral problem rather than a neurological difference.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, echoes of that outdated thinking still linger, particularly in systems like our criminal justice system.
So are you saying that some of the behaviors that might land autistic individuals in trouble with the law, are actually symptoms of their autism rather than, deliberate acts of defiance?
In many cases, yes. A prime example is when an autistic individual has a meltdown or engages in repetitive behaviors. To someone who's not trained, that might appear disruptive or even threatening, but the reality is it could just be their way of coping with sensory overload or emotional distress.
And if the people responding to the situation aren't equipped to recognize those signs, they might misinterpret the behavior and react in a way that actually makes things worse.
Exactly. That's why training is so crucial. We need to equip law enforcement officers, judges, lawyers, everyone involved in the justice system. Give them the knowledge and tools to understand and appropriately interact with autistic individuals.
Hmm. The sources I've been reading really emphasize that this training isn't about giving autistic people a free pass or anything like that. It's about protecting their rights and ensuring that they're treated fairly within the legal system.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true justice needs to be individualized. You have to take each person's unique needs and circumstances into account. A one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work when it comes to neurodiversity.
Okay, so we've established that there's a serious problem here, and that a major part of it comes down to this lack of understanding and training. But I'm really eager to hear more about potential solutions. Our sources do offer some pretty promising ideas for how we can improve this situation.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most encouraging developments is this emergence of alternative programs and sentencing options specifically designed for autistic
Oh,
individuals.
that's interesting. Can you give us some examples of what that looks like in practice?
Sure, we're seeing a growing number of mental health courts being established across the country. These courts take a very different approach, focusing on treatment and support rather than punishment. They recognize that mental health issues, including autism, often play a significant role in the behaviors that lead to contact with the legal system.
So instead of automatically sending someone to jail, they might be connected with therapy medication or other services to address the underlying causes of their actions.
Exactly. Another really promising approach is the use of diversion programs. These programs aim to keep individuals out of the criminal justice system altogether. They might involve things like community service, restorative justice practices, or other interventions focused on rehabilitation and reintegration.
It sounds like these alternatives recognize that incarceration isn't always the answer. Instead, they're trying to find more humane and effective ways to address the needs of autistic individuals who come into contact with the law.
That's the key takeaway. And it goes beyond just alternative programs. Our sources also highlight the need for accommodations and support services within the criminal justice system itself.
So even if someone does end up in jail or prison, there are things we can do to make their experience less traumatic and more supportive.
Absolutely. This could include things like creating sensory-friendly spaces within police stations and courthouses, providing clear communication guidelines for interacting with autistic individuals, or offering specialized advocacy and support services to help them navigate the system.
So it sounds like we need to create a whole new approach to justice,
Yeah.
one that really considers neurodiversity at every single stage.
I think you're right, and that's what makes this conversation so important. We're not just talking about fixing a few problems within the existing system. We're talking about fundamentally rethinking how we approach justice and inclusivity as a society.
Wow, this is heavy stuff.
Ugh.
But such an important discussion to be having. It's clear that this issue deserves far more attention than it's currently getting.
I completely agree. And while the statistics are definitely alarming, there's reason to be hopeful. There are so many dedicated people working tirelessly to raise awareness, advocate for change, and develop innovative solutions. Every voice that joins this conversation brings us closer to a more just and equitable system.
You're so right. Speaking of voices, we'd love to hear from you, the listener. What resonates most with you from our deep dive so far? What thoughts or questions are skirling in your mind? Wow, it's amazing how much we've unpacked just by looking at this one issue. The sheer number of autistic individuals entangled in the justice system is startling, but
I think what's really stuck with me is how these deeply ingrained societal biases contribute to the problem.
that's a really sharp observation. And it's fascinating how this issue really forces us to confront those biases head on.
Mhm.
We often navigate the world through this neurotypical lens. We assume everyone thinks and behaves in a predictable way. And when someone deviates from that, it's easy to kind of label them as difficult or disruptive or even dangerous.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to force square pegs into round holes. Instead of realizing that the pegs are perfectly fine, it's the holes that need to change. That's a great analogy. And it really brings us to the heart of the neurodiversity movement. It's about celebrating that amazing variety of human brains and recognizing that there's no single right way to think or learn or behave.
So how do we translate that powerful concept into the very concrete reality of the justice system? What would a truly neurodiversity-informed approach actually look like?
Well, for starters, it requires acknowledging that autistic individuals have unique strengths and challenges. And those differences need to be considered at every single step, from arrest to trial to sentencing.
So instead of assuming that everyone understands their rights or can communicate effectively with law enforcement, we'd need clear explanations, visual aids, and other supports to ensure their meaningful participation.
Precisely. It also demands comprehensive training for everyone within the system: police officers, judges, lawyers, probation officers. They need the skills to recognize the signs of autism and to interact in a way that respects those different needs and communication styles.
It sounds like a monumental undertaking, but also an absolutely essential one if we want to create a truly just and inclusive society.
It is a big task, but I do believe it's achievable. We're already seeing some positive steps, with the development of mental health courts, diversion programs, and other initiatives that prioritize support over punishment.
That does give me some hope. There are tangible things happening.
Absolutely. And as individuals, one of the most impactful things we can do is raise awareness. Challenge our own preconceptions and advocate for change. Every voice that speaks up for neurodiversity makes a difference.
That's a powerful reminder. We've explored the challenges, the complexities, and most importantly, the potential solutions. Now it's up to all of us to take what we've learned and turn it into action.
Here's a final thought to ponder as you go forward. What if we started viewing autistic behaviors through a lens of understanding rather than suspicion? How might that change our approach to justice? Not just for autistic individuals, but for everyone.
That's a profound question. It reminds us that creating a more just and inclusive world for autistic individuals ultimately benefits us all. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Let's each do our part to make that vision a reality.